So, friends, this podcast started some years ago as a personal hobby. It has become a little more than that. But in the course of my ministry, work, and personal life, uh, I'm not always able to get to it on a regular basis. As if you're a regular listener, you already know. Over the years of this podcast, I have basically done all of the work of the podcast by myself: show notes, recording, editing. But I'm grateful that I have a new partnership with Luke Clayton and the team at increasecreative.co. They are helping me to produce each new episode of this podcast. So, uh, this will, I hope, help us to publish on a more regular basis on Mondays, and will up the game on the quality of this podcast. Luke and his team does great work. I'd love to commend them to you. You can look them up again at increasecreative.co or find more information on the show notes of this episode. Check them out. This is the On Preaching Podcast with H.B. Charles Jr., the podcast dedicated to helping you preach faithfully, clearly, and better. Good day, friends, and thanks for joining this episode of the podcast. So in this episode and the next, I wanted to respond to some of the really good questions that we have been picking up on our YouTube page in response to the new video podcast. Did I tell you all that there's now a video podcast? If you're listening to this on your podcast platform, whatever you use, let me hip you to the fact that there is now a YouTube video for each of the podcasts. And in the comments, I've gotten some really good questions. So what we're going to do in this episode and the next, we're going to go through the On Preaching Mailbag. I don't know if that's a thing. It's a thing now. The On Preaching Mailbag questions we will tackle. And I have for this special episode one of the pastors of the Shiloh Metropolitan Baptist Church, who also helps me with some of our cutting it straight stuff, Royland Kirkwood. Hey, Roy, thanks for joining the podcast.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me. Been a fan for years.
Good to hear. All righty. Well, I say this prayerfully, Roy. I am in your hands. You've got questions. We'll see if I have answers.
All right. So I'm the boss. I'm in charge. This is the first time.
Oh, goodness.
So I'll read off some of the questions. Some of them were repeated, but I'll only read one of those, and we'll give a shout out to who wrote it. First, we have from K.S. Franklin, 7004. And this question was repeated 3 different times.
Okay.
Can you please give a list of good study Bibles?
So I think I mentioned in the preaching hacks that one of my secret sauces in my own personal study is that I read through study Bibles. And I have, in fact, created a little template with the majority of the study Bibles that I use from week to week. And if you contact us at hbcharlesjr.com, I'll send you that template. But for now, let me just mention a couple that are my favorite. Let me just start with those that are really on the top of the list for me. First is the ESV Study Bible. I think, it's my opinion, I think it's the best study Bible. I think it is the most thorough study Bible. And I really do believe that if you took in the cart here in my study, I think there's probably about 30 study Bibles on it. If you was going to take that cart and say you were only going to leave me with one, I would probably ask you to leave me the ESV Study Bible. The one that I am falling in love with and is really high up there, very close to the ESV Study Bible, is the Biblical Theology Study Bible. Don Carson, Andrew Naselli. It's thorough. It's Christ-centered, and it is really have risen up, if I can say it this way, it's risen up the charts for me in terms of study Bibles that I really do benefit from reading. I have been reading the MacArthur Study Bible since it was published, so it is a long-time friend. I would tell you, if you're listening or watching this podcast, man, the Study Bible, MacArthur Study Bible, is worth it just for the Psalms. There are full exegetical outlines on each of the Psalms in that study Bible. And I think, even though the whole thing is great, I think that book alone is worth the price of that study Bible. I also love the literary study Bible. So this study Bible really just focuses on the genre and some of the literary features of what's going on in the passage. So genre and literary features and functions are significant if you are studying the scripture. So much imagery, so many different genres in the passages, and the style of the writers, as I've been preaching through Mark, they have these kind of inclusios, these sandwiches, Mark sandwiches, as they are often called, and just a glimpse at some of those literary features that are at work in the particular passage you're studying, I find helpful. So that was one that matters to me. I think I picked up this study Bible when I was maybe a young man, possibly even in my team. It's the Life Application Bible, and it is exactly what it says. So the notes in that study Bible are really focused on applicational truth. I don't think I'm the strongest when it comes to application. So really nuggets that get me thinking in terms of application are helpful. And that study Bible, I look forward to reading each week. There is another old one, the NIV Disciples Study Bible, and really how it comes at each passage. It is giving footnotes about the doctrinal themes in those sections of scripture or verses of scripture. So I like that one as well. I use the Reformed Study Bible as well, produced by R.C. Sproul and the team at Ligonier. I like that a lot. There are a couple of new ones I've started using. The Systematic Study Bible, which really is kind of helping you think about the how systematic theology is at work in your text. And the Church History Study Bible is also kind of newer ones that are kind of in my rotations that I appreciate. I'll admit a chunk of them are homiletical study Bibles. I use the David Jeremiah one, the Jerry Vines one, the Warren Wiersbe one. And sometimes I may get nothing but a really good quote, but I think a good quote can carry the weight of a full illustration. So I check those and appreciate the more homiletical ones in my week by week study.
I would totally agree with all of those. Those are great. Question number
Well,
2.
look here. I've succeeded. Roy agrees.
Yep.
Ding,
Great,
ding,
great,
ding,
great.
ding.
Question number 2 from Cameron J. DeCow. It says, I would love to hear more about how you select illustrations and perhaps if you ever allow extemporaneous illustrations.
Yeah, that's a 2-part question. Both parts of that question, both parts are excellent. So my philosophy about sermon illustrations really is Malcolm X philosophy: by any means necessary. I saw about a week ago a coffee mug that I am tempted to buy that says, be careful what you say about me or you'll end up as a sermon illustration. But since I don't drink coffee, I guess I'll leave that alone. But that is my sentiment. I am looking for sermon illustration material wherever I can find it. I am reading homiletical commentaries for that purpose. I think a lot of good illustration comes from homiletical commentaries, which are really basically edited sermons. In my reading, I mark up books, and if I find a good illustration, I'll just kind of write in the margin illustration, or make a note in the front or back of that book so that I can find it later. I don't really hoard illustrations, so when I find a good one, I'm going to use it as soon as possible. Sometimes I have an idea of the truth that I want to illustrate. It's something I'm thinking about illustrations in terms of maybe somebody, anybody, everybody, nobody. And an idea comes, what would somebody do in this scenario or the opposite of this scenario? And there are times where I just I use Google and I just, is there a news story about so and so and so? And I have found some illustrations that way. I have a whole section in my library that is just sermon illustration books. I know that there may be homiletics professors who would tell you don't use sermon illustration books, but I'm telling you, if I can get 5 illustrations out of a $25 sermon illustration book, I feel like it is well worth the price. There are personal experiences I use that come up in my own life that I think might be helpful for sermon illustration. But I was recently somewhere and I heard in a conference multiple sermons, and it was like every illustration was a personal illustration out of the preacher's life. And so I get nervous about that. I feel like if I'm doing illustrations extemporaneously, I am more prone to think about something on my feet that has happened in my own life, an experience, a story. That's why I would rather plan them. Many, many times when I have done an extemporaneous illustration, it is a personal illustration, and I don't want to be talking about me that much in my sermons. So I want to be careful about that. Also, the issue with extemporaneous illustrations is that you need to just test them. You need to test those illustrations. Yeah. Even where there are personal illustrations that I use out of my own experience or out of my family life, I run them by my wife and by my children. What do you think? Hey, remember this episode happened in our family? I want to use that as a story. What do you think? I feel like if you're just kind of on your feet, yeah. But I think if you listen to my preaching and you, there is a chunk, I'll admit, there is a chunk of illustrations that are not in the sermon manuscript. It just came to me while I was on my feet. But at this point, I've been doing pastoral preaching for more than 3 decades, and I have a mental war chest of sermon illustrations that I could pull ammunition from when I need it. If I'm talking about Jesus or prayer or the church or service or suffering or the devil or worship, you almost can give me a topic, and I have been preaching long enough that I have illustrations stored up. And yeah, so I'm able to do them on my feet, but I don't know if I would call those extemporaneous. They're just not in my manuscript. And I'm always on the lookout. I'm always on the lookout for wherever in the news, wherever I can. A sermon is a house. The illustrations are windows. And I feel like a beautiful sermon has clean windows for people to see out from the text into how this truth works in their lives. By any means necessary, find good illustrations.
2 for 2.
2 for 2.
2 for 2.
Ding! All righty.
Thanks, Cameron, for the question. Next question is by Snapshot32. Do you use any tech in your sermon prep and presentation, i.e. AI, Google, PowerPoint, OpenLP, ProPresenter, etc.?
Well, I guess this is the answer to the question. I don't know what half of that was that he just listed there. So I have Logos. I use it for word studies. And if I am traveling and I'm not able to get to what I need to in my study, I I use it for further research, but most of the time I am working with physical material from my own library. If I have I'll be honest. While I'm working, um, I may use Google pretty. I may use pretty often Google, where even just as I'm working and a verse comes to my mind, and I just open up my browser and type the Lord is my shepherd, and it gives me the reference, and I able to jot it down and keep going. Um, I avoid things that speed me up in study. I want things to slow me down, to force me to think about the text, to meditate on the text. But when I am trying to find something quickly, hey, I know there's a reference. I know there's a verse. I know there's a statement somewhere else in scripture. I may Google that. I also use Google when I'm working on illustrations. If I have an idea that I want to find an illustration for, not just like a term prayer, but a scenario, I'll dig up. I'll start searching Google. I may, ask, is there a news story where A, B, and C happen? I did a sermon out of Isaiah 55, the Great Invitation. Yeah, I I just Googled a party with invitations that people weren't invited to and showed up to, and I was digging through news stories. I was surprised that there were multiple news stories on those scenarios, and I found an excellent one, and it ended up being the introduction to my sermon. I don't use AI. God willing, soon. I'm kind of collecting my thoughts about AI, but I don't use AI at this point, and I don't. There have been maybe I pastored this church. I'm maybe in my 17th year here at Shiloh, and I can maybe count on my hands where I have had an. There's one time you may know the story about the master violinist who was playing in the subway, and nobody recognized him, and they just put a couple of dollars in there, even though he had sold out shows in the same city. Um, while I had told that story in a sermon, our media team had pulled up the video online, and they were playing that video while I was telling the story. I never looked up. I never acknowledged it. I remember preaching the rich young ruler, and there is a famous picture about the rich young ruler, and I was closing talking about that story, and they posted it on the screen. Um, it's been maybe a couple of more instances, and I never acknowledged it. I just kind of went on with the sermon, but most of the time, I don't. I think there should be a dialogue between pulpit and pew. And I think it is hard enough to get and keep a congregation's attention. I do not want to be pointing them to a screen where I think there's already a fight about screens in their pockets. I don't want to be distracting them from the dialogue that I hope we are having around that biblical text. So I don't use videos in sermons. I don't really use props really on a very couple of special occasions. I have, and I don't think it went well. So it's usually me, a text, that is an open Bible, and my sermon notes, and I'm going from there.
All right, another great one. Thank you, Snapshot, for that question. Next question is from Thomas Stokes Jr. He says, I am a full manuscript preacher, but I desire to move away from taking full manuscripts to the full pulpit, but I don't quite know how to begin that process. What advice would you give me?
Yep. So my general advice here is to just start taking baby steps. Instead of the full manuscript, take a hefty set of notes that are launching pads of ideas, that are kind of roadmaps to what you're going to say. And kind of once you have pared down that sermon manuscript to a set of notes, once you kind of get comfortable there, pare that set of notes down to a smaller set of notes and just keep working your way down. I would not recommend that you, quote unquote, go cold turkey from your manuscript, from a full manuscript to saying I'm going to try to preach this sermon without a net under me. I think you should pare down that full manuscript to some smaller set of notes. And I mean, I think there are ways to do that. There are passages of scripture that you are quoting, or referring to. Instead of, in that sermon manuscript, you've written out everything you want to say about that cross-reference. Just kind of put a cross-reference there and a couple of key words, and then just kind of work from that. You have written out the entire sermon illustration. Just put on those notes maybe the punchline of that sermon illustration and a couple of details you want to make sure you remember, particularly if it's a date or a place. Kind of work your way down and then try that for a while and work your way down. Where at this point, during COVID, I started preaching from a full manuscript for the first time in my pastoral ministry, and I've become addicted to it. And I became dependent upon that manuscript. And maybe over the last year and a half, I'm still trying to wean myself off of that manuscript. And my way now is to basically, I just have a note card, and however much I can get on that note card is what I put on there. But most of that note card consists of keywords. So if my introduction, for instance, is 7 paragraphs, just for argument's sake, I'm just kind of getting the keywords of what I'm doing in that paragraph. And really, with 7 words, I can really work my way through what may end up being a full page of a manuscript. But I think that's a process you got to work to. I wouldn't say even go from full manuscript to just keywords. Kind of just start lopping off some of that manuscript and make it a set of notes, and then keep reducing how many notes those are, really, so that ultimately, really, even if you have the full manuscript, really you want the sermon, you don't want to read the sermon, you want the sermon manuscript to be a roadmap. And kind of when you get familiar with where you are going in your sermons, it will be easier for you to just follow that roadmap without all of the detailed GPS stuff in a full manuscript. Hope that helps. These are great questions. We've got more questions. I think this is a good place for us to pause here, and we'll pick up the next episode with further questions from the On Preaching Mailbag. Join us for that episode. I'd love any feedback that you may have. You can reach me at hbcharlesjr.com. There, you'll find the show notes for this episode of the podcast, as well as previous episodes of the On Preaching podcast. On that site, you'll also find sermon manuscripts, articles that I've written, and various resources, books, etc., that might be a help to you in your Christian walk and your ministry work. Likewise, you can find me on social media, X, Facebook, Twitter, or places that I hang out occasionally. And you can find me on those spaces. My handle is hbcharlesjr.com. This podcast is available on whatever platform you use to listen to podcasts. And so I hope you'll subscribe to get an automatic download of each new episode of the podcast. Likewise, if you'll rate, like, or comment on the podcast, it'll help others find this material more easily, and I will consider it a personal favor. Alongside our annual conference, we periodically host what we call Cutting It Straight intensives. These are smaller, think 30 so or so people events that take place on our campus. They are 2 full days, primarily with me, where you get a chance to pick my brain about preaching and or pastoring. And I get a chance to just pour into and fellowship with those who are in attendance. This upcoming intensive will be June 20th and 21st. It's the 4th or 5th one that we've done. I'm really excited about these times, and I think those who have attended have benefited greatly from it. How about you joining us for the next CIS intensive? You can register for it at hbcharlesjr.com. We have recently launched the Cutting It Straight magazine. I'm very excited about this new project. The goal of this magazine is to help equip you in your life, labor, and leadership. Sure, the spirit of the magazine shares the spirit of this podcast to help you preach faithfully, clearly, and better. But beyond that, we want to talk in this magazine about what it means to guard your life and your doctrine, and how to lead your people with a biblical philosophy of ministry. I'll be contributing to this magazine along with faithful preachers and teachers, both scholars and practitioners. You'll richly benefit from the Cutting It Straight magazine, a quarterly periodical that will be available both physically and digitally. So subscribe today at cutstraight.org. And how about gifting a subscription to a friend? I hope you'll do so. I hope you'll be blessed by the material. Pray for this new project. All the best.
You've been listening to the On Preaching podcast. For more information or resources, or to contact me, go to www.hbcharlesjr.com.